Distinctly. I remember it was in the bleak December, and each separate dying ember wrought its ghost upon the floor.
This death, this slow decay in the autumn of the world. This light is leaving us now. The summer has been furled, and in the hours when the light grows dim, it only mold can live. Hold true to the memory of summer. This death will not win. This death on winter's frame, the flowers have all died. Somber is the eye that sees what comes. Foolish is the man who cries. To the future world in the spring of man, we call out with fading breath. There were those in autumn's rose who knew the nature of this death. There were those in autumn's rose who knew the nature of this death. This death, this strange parade, the shuffle to the end, draining all the life where it resides, leaving us with nothing to defend. But even in the moment when the lie might win, and there seems no hope to be found, hold true to the memory of meaning. Don't forsake the sacred ground. This death, each passing day, hangs over all we do. Grains of sand rush through the glass. The hand of life will release you. To the future world in the spring of man, we call out with fading breath. There were those in autumn's rose who knew the nature of this death. There were those in autumn's rose who knew the nature of this death.
Your hosts are The Great Order and No White Guilt. And this, of course, is The After Party. And you people are far more intelligent than those who are watching Sports Ball right now. The crown winner of last week is none other than Jess Horst, financially gifting $75. $75. Thank you so much. Congratulations. And in second place was Zero Talent, financially gifting $30. Thank you so much. Congratulations to you as well. Folks, you can financially gift on Entropy at 15%. Watch the stream, talk about the stream on the question widget, vote on those questions and comments. The Tall Kevin widget is another name for it. Or you can financially gift over on Cash App at no cost to you. Both of the URLs are in the description below. Jared and I, say it together, folks, evenly share the financial gifts with our guests here on the After Party. Today we have Rachel Summers on, academic Exile, and she will be with us in a moment, but we're going to go ahead and open the show. And then as soon as she arrives, Mr. George and I will begin that discussion. But until then, we will speak with all of you. Mr. George, are you there?
Hello. Yes. I think we're just having some tech difficulties, but we wanted to start and say hello to our chat. Just so that everyone's aware, Rachel has been on 2 times before. So if you want to put her name, Rachel Summers, into the afterparty.tv and listen to her previous episodes, you are free to do so. She is an interesting lady. She was in academia, was telling us on the first time she appeared, which I think was January 2019, but I'm not sure. I have to go look. How she was writing a dissertation on subcultures around like biker gangs and subjects you usually don't explore in academia. And because this was like a white kind of underground subculture, it was frowned upon by her, I guess it would be guiding, what would you call them? Not guidance, but whatever professors are kind of overseeing your dissertation. So that was interesting. Yeah, interesting story. And then she's written several books, and it's always interesting to talk to. So if that sounds interesting to you, then as I said, the last 2 episodes where she was on were quite fun, and I think could get a lot out of them. They're kind of perennial subjects. They weren't really, as far as I remember, topical at the time. They weren't about news. So it's a kind of episode you can listen to any old time and get something out of. But how are you? What can we talk about here in the interim?
Well, I'm fantastic, and thank you for asking, dear brother. We had a very interesting PWR. Essentially, a number of stories that had a thread that ran through them, unintentional thread, and that is the value, the low value, no value that the anti-whites, negative value that they put on Western kind as a people, and therefore as individual members of that people. And it began with this stories about abortion, this attempt to legalize abortion at any age in the UK, or any age of the fetus up to a birth, and then onto a story of a absolutely horrific story, a hush crime of a 13, I think, year-old teenager, white teenage girl, who abducted, gang raped, and murdered by anti-white, non-whites in Germany. Check with CNN to make sure that happened, but that is the news in Germany. And then on to the laudation and praise of another group of people who were 2 people representing a specific country were at the White House, and Joe Biden got down on his knees in worship of them.
Yeah, I saw it. What's the story with that? What do you know about that?
Well, this advisor to the president of this country has mothered, I don't know, like many children, 12 children, maybe a dozen children. And upon hearing this, Biden immediately got down on his knees and it demonstrated what I thought was an obsequiousness, obviously a disgusting obsequiousness, but the kind of thing that if he were not of his perfect functioning mental state that he's in, he would have known better than to act that obsequious in front of cameras and reporters. And And instead, he did not know. So it was very reminiscent to me of a dog rolling over and exposing its belly to its master. Getting down like that. And so I think it's apropos for those who are in the seat of president or in any of these seats in the United States Congress because of their responsibility, their obligation to give an oath. Whether that's true or not, everybody can look into it for themselves. But an oath to a country, and so something that's salient that we can then share with our brothers and sisters. But I thought it was important because we're getting bogged down. I think I saw in the live chat and getting bogged down in just the way things have always been done when it comes to these subjects. And it's really important if we're going to continue to recapture our destiny, which we have already moved mountains that have never been moved in the history of white sympathy, white positivity, by forcing the concepts anti-white and anti-whiteism into the mainstream all around the world. Nothing like it has ever been done. And this is the central concept that will bring down anti-white. Anti-white is the central concept that will bring down anti-whiteism, like racists brought down the central concept that brought down Western civilization, that brought down Western kind. We did that. And yet we should be, those who have white sympathy should be preparing, the beers or whatever it is for us to hoist us up onto these great chairs and carry us around in sublime laudation for the achievement. Instead, we are harangued by lesser achievers, and that's fine. They're giving it their best, and it's resulting in whatever it is. But instead of celebrating this enormous success, and I mean beyond comprehension, history will be able to really give full accounting of this massive sea change in the fight for our well-being, the recapture of our destiny. They will be able to give a full accounting. But still, you would think that those who are here in the midst of it would be able to say, wow, this is lexicon and dialectics that have now entered the mainstream as a consequence of what this community, this white positive community, is doing. And it's bettering all of these people's lives. And so it's self-improvement, it's family improvement, it's community improvement. It changes the tapestry, the language through which all of the rules, codes, laws, etc., have to pass. And it is an incalculable success. And yet, instead of people having, I guess, a proper disposition toward those who have achieved this, they come running up and saying, this is what you should do. So we have, and it's the opposite of what we're doing and having the success with. So we have this, for example, when it comes to abortion, this getting into the weeds of things that we have no power over. Instead of how should we discuss this with our friends, family, and strangers in a way that's going to bring people either over to using the lexicon and or going free. And then you have the case with the 13-year-old girl, or I believe she was, discussing how it's not fair and discussing who's responsible for who brought these particular non-white people in or whatever it might be, instead of that this is a hush crime. And then using the lexicon and dialectics to seed our people so that her life is actually given value by the work that we do, empowering people with language, empowering people with art. And remember, for those who keep downplaying language, that's what you think with, idiots. That's you can't think in anything but language. So your thoughts, that's what we're changing, the people's thoughts. And so, I think that it was a very interesting day on PWR, and interesting how it turned out with this thread of no value for our people, really demonstrating it. And I know that everybody here knows these things, and we're the ones who are changing the world, and God bless every single one of you. And we have another champion who has just stepped in backstage, and I'm going to bring her forward. The tech issues are resolved, and she is with us, the great Rachel Summers. Now, I want you to do, dear lady, is tell everybody who might not know who you are, tell them a bit about yourself, and then the great Mr. George will take us into the conversation. Welcome, welcome. The floor is yours. But you'll have to unmute first.
Hey,
there you go.
Can you hear me now? Sorry about that. You know, I'm not the tech savvy type. Yeah, you were kind of going in and out. I'm not sure if that's me or the feed, but it's storming pretty bad here, so I'll try to stay on. But as far as myself goes, I'm a writer. I've written books now. I'm working on it here. I almost PhD and I dropped out, and that's when I started writing the novels. Right now I'm living in Nashville, and I have 2 sons, and that's really about the most exciting thing about me.
Well, I was just saying before you got on how you've been on twice and was giving a little preview or synopsis of some of the things that we've talked about in the past. How about, because we have a lot of new people since the last time you've been on, tell us a little about the books that you've written, some of the themes in them, and then we'll get into some other topics.
Well, the theme, I guess, for the whole series overall would be the journey of the soul through a very corrupted world. That's probably the most succinct way of saying it. It starts out with Joan of Arc. It's a modern day version of her. She's part of a biker gang. That feeds into the whole idea of the underbelly of society being its actually stronger part. And the other books go into, let's say, the bad girls of the Bible and their journeys. And then we have Godless, which is the story of a 17th century demon possession at a convent in France. And let's see,
Yeah,
I forget my own books. The Forgetting is the 4th one, and that is like a literal journey across country, but also all of these are kind of a theme of a journey, and it's souls and archetypes. We have warriors, saints, virgins, whores, the whole lineup. I'm about halfway through the first section of the last book. It'll be a couple of years, but we'll get there.
We're going to keep an eye on this. It may help to go to Avatar, just because your audio is dropping out sometimes. I know you said there's a bad storm down where you are.
Okay, hold on.
It might help.
Does that help at all?
We shall see. Funny
Okay,
Avatar.
good.
Speaking of some of the themes we've been talking about. Yeah, I was saying before you came on that the first time you were on, you spoke about how you were pursuing a dissertation at university, and you were looking at some of the subcultures that don't really get spoken about much. You just mentioned biker gangs and how that plays into some of your fiction. But remind us again, feel free to expand on it, because it's probably is new to most people, because that first time you were on was over 2 years ago at this point. It's like 2.5 years ago. So I always found that interesting, how you found, like, what you found relevant about that culture, what you learned about it, but also how and why academia weren't too thrilled about you pursuing that subject matter.
Okay, the whole idea of the subculture comes from the Middle Ages, which is what my degree was in primarily, religious studies and philosophy of the Middle Ages. So they had this concept, caput gerat lupinum, which means he who wears the head of the wolf. Now this person was exiled from so-called polite society, and one could hunt and even kill such people and hate them and poke fun at them, do whatever. Basically, you're outside of the law and could be treated anyway. The law no longer applied to you. So this might be like your Robin Hood character, your outlaws, your vagabonds, even traveling minstrels and the sort. Gypsies, of course, would fall into that category. Now today, what you might see along those lines would be your bikers, even people in the entertainment industry who have not made it yet, of course. We won't talk about the ones who have made it. That's a whole different issue. You've got, I guess you could call them outlaws. Not sure exactly how you would describe that. Bikers is where I focused because I went to a Harley mechanic school and worked at a Harley shop for a little while just to do some research for the first book. So that's kind of where I landed, if you will. But the subculture idea is kind of like the whole seedy underbelly. Without the seedy underbelly, there's nothing there to hold up the backbone. So you need it to have society function the way so-called successful types think it is supposed to function. And what I mean by that... Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Functioning societies need their outlaws, if you will. They need someone to hate. They need someone to compare themselves to. The lawyer needs the criminal just as much as the criminal might need the lawyer, if you will. And today, it gets a little complicated because you have this idea of toxic masculinity. Now, where are you going to go to find that without any sort of shaming? Well, you might go to your local biker bar. This place is a safe haven, if you will, for the really rugged manly types. And they are outcasts from society, especially in the last few years. And they have to have somewhere to go. Now, this whole thing started with the Hells Angels. And that was started by Sonny Barger right after the Vietnam War. And these guys come back from war and they really don't know what to do with themselves. So they got to have an outlet, and that's kind of where they turn. It's something where they can still be this masculine aggressive type without being shamed for it. And really what we need more of in society are men not afraid to act like men. And if they have to have a Harley under them, well, so be it. You know, people will get over it. Still, though, there's a huge stigma, and that's something we need to get past.
What I was going to ask a moment ago, and by the way, the sound is better. So, unfortunately, we'd love to have you on video, but it seems like it's working better with the storm right now. Everyone's hearing you okay. But what I was going to ask you about is... actually, I think the quotes from Sonny Barger I've seen years ago, that to live outside the law, you must be honest. So what did you find out about when someone doesn't have all of the structures of, as you were saying, polite society to fall back on, and they choose a lifestyle like this that's outside of the norms for most people?
Oh my God.
I'm interested about codes of honor, because it's easy to stereotype these people, as you were saying, as just kind of reckless. But I'd imagine that it's a little more complex than that, and that there is that honor among these outlaw types as well. And particularly, even though it's in a very, rough and tumble way that a lot of people aren't used to, that there's still these codes, especially because a lot of these guys are our guys, obviously, in American biker gangs. And it, as you were saying, it harkens back to something of a European warrior ethos. So what kind of strands of that did you see in these biker cultures?
Are you there?
We can hear you.
I caught some of that. I heard a code of honor and warrior ethos. I think those are probably
the code. Those are probably the key words. Yeah, like the honor.
Okay,
the honor among the outlaws.
Okay, they do definitely have a code of honor. One might call it something more of a lex talionis sort of idea, which is kind of like an eye for an eye. But they are your best allies in a time of trouble. They will stand by your side if you need them, certainly. But if you cross them, you're in trouble. But isn't this the way, the natural order? I think it is. And we need to get back to that to some extent. Our legal system has gotten absolutely ridiculous. And more often than not, it's the victim that ends up defending him or herself in court rather than the criminal. And not to mention just the absolute complications involved in the legal system are just over the top. As far as the warrior ethos, really what outlet do young men have anymore? I know my sons are involved in boxing and martial arts and all sorts of things where they can act like men and not be shamed for it. And this is their absolute favorite time of the day, is to go and fight and act like boys are supposed to. And we really need more of that, not less. And yes, they're boys. This gender stuff is ridiculous and gets on my nerves. So let's not get me started on that one.
Oh, yeah. Well, Jason and I went to Avatar as well. So let us know if you can hear us better, just to help with it's less strain on the whole stream.
Okay.
When we're all on video. So I know a lot of it. Again, you mentioned Sonny Barger came out with Vietnam War vets, but obviously there were biker gangs going well before that, decades prior to that. You know, there were some pretty famous ones in the 40s and 50s. So, like, what is it? What do you know about the history of that? Like, what is it in the American culture in particular? Obviously, we have this culture of the road because we have all these open highways. But that's just a technical thing. But like, what are some of the places that from society that these guys were coming from, and how did they form? What's like I said before, even before the Vietnam War, can you give us some of the history of that?
I'm not terribly familiar with it before that point. When you say 40s and 50s, it reminds me of The Wild One, that movie with Marlon Brando. I don't know if any of you have seen that. It's fantastic. But that was, there's definitely an early biker culture before then. I don't think it was as pronounced. And I'm not sure that they were involved in the criminal element so much as they were later on. But yeah, that's just Americana for you. It's the whole freedom of the road. It's the don't tell me what to do, don't tread on me idea. It's all part and parcel of it. And the motorcycle is, I guess, a freer way of travel than a car. They refer to cars as cages. So it's the freedom thing. I gotta have my snacks and cup holders. I've got to have my car, but bikes are fun.
Yeah, well, I mean, of course, it kind of harkens back to the horse as well. You know, crossing the open plains on horseback. Right. Something very apropos about that as well. And I know, again, you know, there's people have different takes on this. I certainly would not be a prime candidate for a biker gang. I don't think that's a surprise to anyone. But it's still interesting about the places for these guys and initiation. I think that's an obvious question that probably a lot of people would think about when we're talking about this subject is, do you think that a lot of these guys, they're looking for that hierarchical initiatic order and didn't have that elsewhere? As you were saying, maybe some of them were in the military, but then were disenchanted by it or kind of spit back out when they weren't needed anymore, and then they needed something to give them like a place in a group, and how important that is for guys.
Absolutely. I think that's a huge part of it. Our society now does not have that sort of thing for young men. And we used to, most definitely. you were like, you compared horses to motorcycles. Well, in the Middle Ages, you would have your page, your squire, and eventually, if you made the cut, you were a knight. So this is kind of the same thing, only with the bikers, you're a prospect for a while, and yeah, you're going to be doing a lot of stupid things. But if you make the cut, you end up being you get the patch. Is what it is. So it's definitely a ritualistic sort of a thing, maybe a little more relaxed than it was in the Middle Ages, but very much along the same lines of an initiation and a coming of age sort of an idea, which is hard to find in modern culture. So I do think that's a big reason that young men turn to it.
Yeah, it seems like a modern day berserker too. I think of the berserkers, the Scandinavian berserkers, and some of those guys definitely look the part. But it just it goes to show that you could try to suppress the forms, but the instincts always come back. They pop up somehow and some way. What about as a woman? What did you see about how women are regarded and treated in such circles?
I honestly think it depends on that woman's behavior. I have never had any problems with any of these guys, none whatsoever. Now, some of them come in, they're meek and submissive, and they're going to get treated that way. It's the whole idea that if you act like a victim, you're going to be one. And I'm not saying that if they're going to just jump all over anybody who doesn't come in and act domineering, but you got to have a certain demeanor with them, and you kind of have to know the code of conduct, and you'll be fine. They're really not horrible people at all. They will protect you in any fight, and I haven't had any problems. So you hear horror stories, but I don't have any for you. They've always been very good to me.
Well, that's good to hear.
I think it depends on how you behave.
Tracks with things.
I think it's like a lot of other groups. If you go in with an attitude problem, or you go in and you act scared, you're probably going to have some issues.
Right. Well, I know we had some other things. That's true. I know we had some other things to talk about, and it might relate back to what we've already discussed about that subculture. But as I said, I wanted to give people who are new to you a little taste of the kinds of things that you write about and how you explore these things that you don't hear about all the time. One of the things that we were talking about off air that really interests me, and it relates to things Jason and I talk about on the show sometimes, is you said something to the effect of the psychology of left brain, right brain, or you could think of it as intuition and rationality, and how there's been a rift in that, a split in that. It's always been an interesting topic to me, where I see a lot of things kind of getting unnecessarily disconnected today, and how that's playing out in how people are kind of being corralled to this side and that side, and playing out in all kinds of cultural and political ways. I guess you could say, I always say there's a lack of like a holistic approach to things, holistic consciousness, and people are very kind of like split up. So but that's my take on it. Like when you posited that topic, what were you thinking of it? Like, what have you been observing in some of the goings on societally right now over the last year since we've spoken on that, through that lens though, of that consciousness split?
Okay, so you've got your right brain and your left brain, right? The brain is divided into two hemispheres. Now, the right brain is your more creative, intuitive side, and the left brain is the more analytical, logical side. So if you think of like a creative idea, like writing a book, for instance, I will have that idea and it forms on the right side. But in order for me to make it a reality, that idea has to travel to the left side and get broken down and analyzed and then put back together into some sort of coherent plan, which then goes back to the right side of the mind to come out as an actual book. So it's kind of like a seed becomes a bud, which then becomes a bloom. It has to be this 3-step process. Now, right now, what we're experiencing, I guess you could say, in the whole of human consciousness is we started out on the right side of the mind. We've moved to the left, and we are stuck there right now, which is why things are so topsy-turvy and upside down. When the left hemisphere gets control of something, it sometimes has a hard time letting go, especially if that person's life is imbalanced. Like people in cities in particular have a hard time giving things back to the right side of the mind because they're disconnected from nature. So right now, with the politics and all going on, you can see that the left side of the mind is in charge and wants to remain so. But in order for humanity to evolve, we have to give ourselves back to the right side of the mind. Now that sounds crazy and complicated, but it's really not that complicated. If you think about right-wing politics versus left-wing, which I hate that dichotomy, but we're going to go with it right now. You get the more creative types, I believe, on the right, and the more analytical types on the left, who literally will start screaming if you try to introduce new ideas. We've seen it, and it's funny, but we've seen it. So right now, the left brain is trying to retain control, kind of like the left is politically, and we see this playing out in the streets. If you will let me here, I've got an excerpt from a book that was published about 20 years ago. Let me see. It's called The Master and His Emissary. And he talks about the left and right side of the mind. And this is crazy to me because it was published before things started getting so wild. And what he says is the left hemisphere prefers the impersonal to the personal. And that tendency, in any case, can be instantiated in the fabric of a technologically driven and bureaucratically administered society, which we see now. The impersonal replaces the personal. There is a focus on material things at the expense of the living. Social cohesion and the bonds between person and person or person and place, the context in which each person belongs, will be neglected or even actively disrupted, but because both are incomprehensible to the left hemisphere when it acts on its own. There will be a depersonalization of the relationships between people. Exploitation rather than cooperation is the default relationship between individuals. Resentment leads to an emphasis on uniformity and equality. Sound familiar? As a result, individuality will be ironed out and identification will be by categories like socioeconomic group, races, sexes, genders, and so on, all of which will feel themselves to be implicitly or explicitly in competition with one another. Paranoia and lack of trust come to be the prevailing stance. This also is the prevailing stance between a government towards its people. This government will seek total control. It is an essential feature of the left hemisphere's take on the world that it can grasp it and control it. Talk of liberty, which is an abstract ideal for the left, will increase, but individual liberty will actually be curtailed. Visual and panoptical controls will become an end in themselves. We have cameras everywhere now, don't we? Constant monitoring, interception of private information and communication, this is going to become the norm if the left takes control. Now he's talking about the left hemisphere, but this also applies to the left politically. Measures such as DNA bases will be introduced in response to so-called exceptional threats and exceptional circumstances. But in reality, these will be ineffective because their aim will be only to increase the power of the state and diminish the status of the individual. The concept of the individual depends on uniqueness. However, according to the left hemisphere's take on reality, individuals are interchangeable, equal parts of a mechanistic system, a system it needs desperately to control. That sounds a lot like what's happening out there in the world right now, and that is exactly what would happen if the left side of the mind tries to take over. So I don't think it's any coincidence that the left politically is also in line with the left intellectually.
Could you just quickly give us the name of that book again and when it was written, when it was published?
It's the Master and His Emissary. Ian McGilchrist is the author, and I think it was 2008, 2009, around that time.
Yeah, it's pretty. That was on point.
Right.
As I was listening to that, Rachel, as I was listening to that, I'm curious about your thoughts on this. Usually, at least in popular parlance, although again, it's a theme that our community here is familiar with, and Jason and I have spoken about amongst both with each other and with other guests. Really interesting take in that excerpt you read, because usually in popular presentation, the left, quote unquote, is thought of as being more creative, where there's more of the artistic and media content has come out, has been produced by people that seem to adhere to what's generally under that rubric. But I've always felt that there was often a something cold about it. And so it was really interesting for me to hear that quote discussing how it's actually an overly analytical side that has lost touch with the other elements of what it means to be a person in the world, like hierarchies, like we were talking about before, that we're connected, holistic, we're parts of systems. So that even relates to what we were talking about with that desire, that instinct that the guys who join the bikers gangs have. And that maybe what it was is that this power structure, as that quote was describing, it because it's seeking to grab all this power and control, and the image that the author painted of the cameras everywhere, that what happened in the 20th century and prior even, was that that kind of consciousness was, and the kind, well, really people, you don't want to abstract it, but the people who hold those beliefs or who were in power were kind of manipulating or collecting and corralling creative individuals, using them as puppets in their agendas. Because again, we've talked about this quite often. It might sound very nice and seductive on the surface to say things like everybody's one and everyone should be treated the same, and there's nuances to that kind of conversation. But well, that's the trick, to not balance it with anything else and to leave it there, to leave it at that abstraction. It becomes meaningless, and it becomes a form, in that vacuum, it becomes a form of tyranny, because you can't make distinctions, you can't assert boundaries. That's something I talk about a lot, boundaries. And we get, it starts with kumbaya in the 1960s, and everything sounds nice. But then we're the ones, white people are the ones who go along with that, get duped, and all of a sudden, well, there's an England game going on right now, and we can see what the English football team is increasingly looking like. We could see what the fruits of this kumbaya attitude have been. It's suicide if we continue this. But very interesting that the author's spin on this was that it's more rational, because again, in most people's minds, they think of the quote unquote left, and functionally, we're using that term, but functionally we understand that what it's come to mean in practice now is really anti-white. And we know most of what passes for conservatism is also unfortunately anti-white. But the kind of thinking and culture and assumptions that goes with what's generally thought of as the left, usually thought of as creative. I found it very interesting to sum up that it was couched by this author as actually like a paranoid, like kind of that lizard brain thing, like just about cold calculating survival. Certainly seems to be the the mindset of what people call the elites, the people who are in control, and that we're the ones, people like us, actually try to have more of a holistic consciousness. Like you say, go back to right, but would you say, to me, I would think of it more, I was thinking in terms of harmony and balance, that it would really be a whole brain, holistic, kind of like the DNA strand, a spiral, a conversation, just like male and female creates things between the intuitive and the rational. But what's your understanding of that? Because you said something to the effect of we have to get back to the more creative, right brain, intuitive thing. But how do you understand that right now?
When I say going back to the right, I think what I mean there is completing the journey, if you will. It's 3 steps of creation, analysis, synthesis. So yes, it is more of a whole brain thing, but it has to bridge that gap and get back over to the right in order for it to become part of the whole brain, if that made any sense at all. As far as the left being more creative, as far as the left being creative according to the popular ideas out there, what I see as far as art, music, etc., in the popular sphere is not creative per se, it's more destructive. I mean, we all remember the artist who had the toilet seat hanging on the wall and these other ridiculous things. That's not art. That is meant to destroy and undermine civilization is what that is. And the music we have now, it's horrible. I sound like an old person here. But it really is. It's not creative. It's meant to disrupt, and the beats are so simplistic, it just dumbs you down. This, to me, is not creation, but destruction. And that is part of the left brain mentality, which also translates, unfortunately, into a lot of left-wing politics. But yeah, you're right. The thought, the journey of the thought is a whole mind sort of a thing. And interestingly, part of that, the corpus callosum is what connects the 2 hemispheres of the mind. And the meaning of apocalypse is a lifting of the veil. So I wonder, is that veil in our mind? Is this the next phase of human consciousness, that we kind of get rid of that divider and become whole-brained again? And is that what the left is fighting so desperately against? It's an idea.
Yeah, I mean, I'm familiar with that thinking in that direction. When you say again, do you have some kind of belief or understanding that there was a time in the past when people were functioning on a more complete level and it was lost? Or is that, I know some people feel like mythologies of the fall that we see in many religions kind of speak to that sort of thing, a fall in consciousness?
I don't think we fell from whole-minded consciousness so much as it was simply a journey that we had to make. If you want to talk about the fall, that brings up ideas of the Garden of Eden. Okay, so we got kicked out of the garden because we had to earn our way back in. That would be, again, your 3-step process: creation, analysis, synthesis, which is right, left, right, to simplify things. But the whole idea of the fall, I kind of see as a fall into linguistic consciousness. And when I first tuned in, Jason, I think I heard you say something about we can't think without language, which is very true. It's almost impossible for me to think something without language. Of course, babies do it. So there has to be part of our brain that is capable of doing this. Now, there are some interesting books about this, like The Origin of Consciousness and the Breakdown of the Bicameral Mind. It's a catchy title, right? But he talks about when people...
I think I've seen that around.
Right brain. That's a doozy. He talks about when people were more right-brained and would speak directly to their gods, which again brings up the whole Eden myth. You were able to talk to God and walk with God, and then all of a sudden that communication was lost for some reason. This happens in multiple cultures right around the same time, and at that same time, interestingly enough, we have the rise of writing. There's got to be some sort of a connection here with linguistic consciousness and this loss of being able to psychically communicate with our gods, for lack of a better term. But I think that was a step necessary for us to make. It was a fall from a bliss ignorance, if you will, into this journey that we have to make back up to Eden in order to get a wizened bliss rather than the blissful ignorance. So again, we have the right, left, right thing going on. And I wonder if that's just the whole human journey in a little capsule there.
I'd imagine that's what your novels are largely about, like you were saying, is an allegory for that sort of thing.
Yes, yes, it's the soul journeying through a very corrupted world, and what this civilization does to such a soul. Like going back to the Joan of Arc book, she is a saint, right, in the original history of her. But what I did is set her in the modern era, and what would this corrupted world do to such a person? It does not end well. The saint is turned into something rather upside down, kind of like our culture is right now. And I go through multiple archetypes and turn them on their head the same way, because that's really what we're experiencing right now, is a bit of a shakeup. And I think that's because we're on the edge of some sort of evolution, if you will, as far as our consciousness goes.
Yeah, you know what I'm interested in to hear your thoughts on, Rachel, is so okay, on this note then, another thing that I often come back to, you hear about when you tread into such territory as we're speaking about now, is the extremes. Sometimes, often, extremes on a surface level look to be similar. So the insane man and the enlightened man on the surface sometimes look very similar. And you keep bringing up the number 3, that comes up in a lot of our peoples, white peoples, peoples of European descent, mythology, and it's the first stable number, something I've thought and written about myself. So, do you think that this sensing of the fact that we have a very strong rational mind and we've developed things like analysis and critical thinking and writing, which of course bring many boons and many blessings. But there's also that searching for something that transcends that, and that's maybe more or intuitive, is misplaced sometimes in your conception of kind of this journey to get the balance right, is that a lot of modern people of European descent, of our folk, they don't go all the way, and they acquiesce to this kind of glorification of the savage, of going back. So you think of films like The Gods Might Be Crazy from the 1980s. I just read a quick thing about today. I never saw it, but I've seen reference to it, and it certainly fits within a theme. And the theme is of, long story short, is of the noble savage. We've seen a proliferation of this in popular culture, and just more and more and more of how our modern world is all corrupt, and you have people from our folk who think that it's those who don't have the technologies and the writing and the analysis that are somehow purer. But as always, it's more complex than that, because I don't know how many of us would really put our money where our mouth is and go back to a time or go into a current culture where we didn't have Novocaine and surgeries and all that sort of thing. I know technology is a two-edged sword. And I agree with you that people in cities can easily get out of touch with nature. I hear you loud and clear with all that. I'm sure everyone here in our community listening does as well. But I'm just bringing it up because I see that this is very much an Achilles heel. Again, something that comes up on our show, Jason and I talk about sometimes. We have to be aware of these little conundrums that especially our people have, because we're multidimensional thinkers and we're complex people. And that's a wonderful thing, and it's given us great gifts, but it also exposes these Achilles heels that we have. And the one I'm speaking about now is essentially, as mentioned, that myth of the noble savage. So how do you kind of understand that, where it's kind of the easy social signal to say, oh, we should just go back, whereas it's really more about, if I'm picking up what you're saying, it sounds like where we agree, we'd be similar, Rachel, in that it's not about going back so much as it's just about now integrating everything, continuing the wonderful critical thinking we have and rationality and analysis, but balancing it. Well, as you've been saying, the synthesis. But it seems like a reversion is really what's pitched in most popular media as this kind of siren song to our people.
Right. We cannot go back. We have to move forward. And as far as looking back, I can understand the appeal, but when a lot of people see a golden age, forgive me for being frank here, I read this somewhere and I thought it was hilarious. When people see a golden age, what they're really seeing might just be piss in the streets. You weren't there, so you don't know, is the moral of that story. As far as the noble savage, I'm sure there were a few noble savages. There were probably some real jerks, too, and a lot of violence. Just like today. I don't think that people have changed all that much. It is simply a grass is greener kind of a thing. It's easy to look back and say, I wish it was still this way. Like the 1950s, people idolize that time period. What they're seeing, though, is television 1950s. They're not really understanding what life was really like. You know, not every house was Leave It to Beaver. It wasn't. I wish it could be, but it just wasn't that way. And it never will be. Human nature is far more complex than that. So idolizing something in the past really isn't going to get you anywhere. Take what you need from the past, learn from it, and move forward. We have to go forward. You can't go back. There was a lot in the past that was not good. There's a lot now that's not good. Let's learn from that and leave it behind and go on and do something better. We can make something better. I really believe that we can.
Yeah, what I think is needed, and the kind of things that we all are doing here together, and what you caught from what Jason was saying about language and changing people's minds and hearts through language when you were just joining the stream, is we believe in a forward motion of still moving towards that end that you were just saying, of taking lessons from the past, taking dreams about the future, trying to fuse the best of all these different elements. I think that there might be a few different things going on, but just as a quick sketch of the phenomenon I mentioned with the people who do the whole noble savage thing and who idolize that and have some kind of an animus against Western civilization and our advancements, even if they're members of Western civilization who greatly benefit every day from those advancements, is that they've lost that will to move forward. And I think that that's one of the meta issues that we're dealing with right now. The bottleneck that we're in is that a fair number of people, as we all know, they're not shooting for anything anymore. They're not venturing out towards anything. They don't believe in building something new, something using old elements, but something that still will be of our time and whatever's in the future. And it's that lack of direction. It's that lack of thinking big and having vision, having that thrust that our people had to go cross oceans and walk across the South Pole and fly rocket ships into outer space. That thrust has been cut away from so much of our people. Like that's like this one of the fundamental spiritual. It's like a lobotomy. It's like a spiritual, something in our spirit was like disconnected. And that's what all of us here, we're trying to be this vanguard of people who rekindle that spirit of exploration and movement forward, adventure in us.
I think relating to our discussion of looking to the past, what we can do with that is learn from the journeys that our ancestors made, and some of these were incredible journeys, and apply that to a journey within our own souls. Right now, what we have to do is move forward, not necessarily physically, but mentally and spiritually. And that's going to take perhaps even more work than going all the way to California in a covered wagon or crossing an ocean into Here Be Dragons. You've got to do the work, though. It's the whole subconscious thing. Get in there. Don't necessarily subdue the beast. Tame him and make him work for you. We need this. We have to move forward psychologically and spiritually in order to grow as a people, or that's the end. That's it.
Yeah,
and as far as, like, go ahead.
No, I was just saying that's why we focus so much on culture and consciousness and language and arts. Because if you don't have that engine, what are you marching for? It's, you're throwing rocks against tanks, as we often talk about. But I'm sorry,
Right.
what were you saying?
As far as whites in general looking to other cultures and saying that Western civilization is lacking in this or that, well, of course it's lacking. Did it ever occur to these people that we were the first culture robbed? We have young people in droves going to India or going to the Amazon rainforest or going out west to find these shamans to help them spiritually. When they have that within their own culture, we have simply lost connection to it. Well, what we're going to have to do is the soul work to get that back and become the elders that the next generation needs. It's not going to be easy, but it has to be done. We cannot continue looking to other people to help us with this. We have to do it ourselves, or we will lose it forever.
Yeah,
I think it can be done.
We're with you on that. That's what we're all doing here. But how is the
Culture
chat
creators.
doing? Yeah, and that's why we love to speak to people like you, writers, thinkers, explorers. That's what we're all doing here. And speaking of which, Jason, I know you said we have a few comments from the chat before we begin wrapping up today. I hope everyone's been enjoying conversations. Always interesting to pick Rachel's brain. As I said, there's 2 other shows with this fine lady on the afterparty.tv. If you'd like to go search her name and listen to the other chats that we've had with her.
It's always fun having Rachel on, a thinking lady that has been in different spheres, academic, blue collar, and I enjoy listening to the conversation between these 2 wonderful people every single time we have Rachel on. Let me jump on over to Entropy, and we will give a big hello to Eminent Rain, who financially gifted $9. Thank you, good brother. Promethean hails so hard, he writes, just lurking while I deliver some food. By the way, Prometheus Rising song number 7 is almost done. I sent you an email so hard. Thank you so much, brother. This is one of our magnificent artists who, if we lived in a healthy day, would of course be on big stages and we would all be sitting miles away and watching the music. But the world hates the world is anti-white, and so it hates white males in particular. And the more talented they are, the more it hates them. So Eminent Rain is here with us doing the Lord's work. Thank you, brother.
Go check out his set on Whack TV's YouTube channel. Their live stream is saved there for posterity, at least for now, on their Whack TV YouTube. And you could hear scorching guitar leads. He had some backing tracks, but he played lead guitar and sang live at the Whack Fest. And just like everyone else, he's an impressive guy, a great musician. And we're all going to grow this together so that he does get on that stage.
Absolutely. And I can't wait. Is that just, let me ask you really quickly, Jared, is that different than the video they have on DLive?
Well, my understanding is that the DLive replays eventually go away, but maybe I'm mistaken. Maybe if you pay for a certain level of membership, they stay there in perpetuity. Right now, because it was on the Saturday night, the last Whack SNL, only a few nights ago, I would imagine it's still in the replays tab on DLive, on their DLive channel as well. Mm-hmm. It should be under the Whack Fest video part 2, because they basically broke all the recordings of the live performances into 2 parts, and his was on the second part, the more recent.
Very cool. I'll have to get over there and watch all of it. I guess where they have some Jeff and whoever, Mama P, maybe they go back and forth and then they show different clips from Whack Fest. Is that how it's? Yeah.
Basically, for the last 2 Saturdays, they did it like they usually do in SNL, but as opposed to Mama P and Jeff playing DJ, as you said, and playing a song and then talking about it, and then playing another song and then talking about it. They would play sets from the people who performed live. So it'd be a longer span of time. Some of it was not video because some people didn't want their faces seen at this point. Hyrith was hers was all videoed. But that second part had Luke. It had one song from Jeff because obviously most of his time was spent organizing it. It had a set from Donald Kent, who sounded great. His voice sounds great live. Hyrith sounds just like the record live. I mean, again, not to get too off track, but like you were saying, this is real talent. No auto tune, no studio tricks. These people can deliver live, and I look forward to doing that eventually myself. But it's impressive, and it's good to know we all keep each other sharp. I want to be surrounded by good people, so it makes me do better. It inspires me. But it was very impressive to hear these live performances and how well it went. And Boxcar and who is it? Chuck Miller helps Jeff Winston with his production, where those two guys ran the audio. And I could tell you just quickly, live sound is tough to do, and it then translate into just picking it up on a video camera. But again, amazing. I mean, these are people doing things on professional levels, just all volunteer, just all us, getting together, doing it in a grassroots way. So definitely encourage everyone to go check that out.
I'm going to be one of them, so you might run into me over there, folks. But looking forward to that. We have the great Mrs. Jess Horst. Let's get a round of applause for this wonderful lady. $20 financial gift. She writes here, we have momentum. We are just getting started. We will recapture our destiny. Beautifully, beautifully written, sister. We have the great Slots coming in with $3 financial gift. And he writes here, act as an occupied people. Aspire as an autonomous people. Well written. Thank you for that, dear brother. A great champion in service to white well-being. McDozer, let's get a big raucous round of emojis for McDozer, financially gifting $25 US and writing here. So, when's the next book, brother? And would you and Jared consider doing a collaboration on the next publication? You mean something independent of Go Free, or are you thinking about the magazine, White People's Quarterly, or like the book we did, the coffee table book? You can write into the Tall Kevin widget, the question widget over there on Entropy with that elaboration on your question. But iteration 2 has been shortened so that we can get it to you all in the month of July, this month. So it should be out this month. Iteration 2. Yes, the many more pages, much more clarification, and much more empowerment. And we will continue thereby changing the world with the thoughts that we think and the language that we use. Let's slide on over here to, I know we have at least one question. Let me pull up Cash App and make sure that we haven't missed anybody there. And as it refreshes, I will say a quick big thank you to Ray and Heidi. They are enduring a storm, and yet Ray is here moderating.
Yes.
And doing a fabulous job. Thank you so much.
Solid people, more solid people.
Solid people. This is where the adults come to save our people. We have a question for Rachel from Alfie. She asks if Rachel could answer this question. Why is it, does Rachel think, that some white sympathetic people refuse to adopt the Going Free lexicon, especially since it has demonstrated that it works so well? She finishes with, sounds like Master and his emissary. Rachel.
I think a lot of our people, I think a lot of folks just are not quite there yet. They will get there. by hook or by crook. It's just a matter of time. Young folk in particular, you know, my sons, I guess, are so inundated with this from me that it's old hat to them and it's a big deal, whatever. That they last lives, though. And good for them, but it's somewhere set in, and you have to understand that there's a fight in front of us. And a lot of these people, especially the exhausted, they don't have the life. They can't. It's like that. This sounds ridiculous, but always upset. And I hear Leonard. Sometimes that's all you want is a simple life. But for this next generation of rising kids, it's not really going to be a possibility. And that is sad. And I think a lot of the reasons that they have not quite come out in full support of this is they just plain don't want to. But they will. And we have to help them through it. And we'll get there.
Thank you for that. And we have some from Heidi over in the question widget. We'll begin here with Greek American Male writes, "Thank you for your service to White Wellbeing, brother." Well, you are most welcome. Heidi then writes to Rachel, "But don't most people operate with both hemispheres? A person may be more one hemisphere than the other, but to be completely left-brained is very extreme." She goes on, "What would you say about autistic people who tend to be more logical, analytical, and categorical, but yet not run by emotions?" And finally, she writes, "I always felt the political left was more right-brained over by, ruled over by emotions and wants and arrogance instead of common sense and logic." Rachel.
For that last part, as far as the left politically being emotional, I think what that is the right brain screaming for attention, if you will. And yes, most people do operate with both hemispheres, so it's a generalization to speak this way. It also runs along political lines, so I think it helps us to understand what's going on in the world right now. If nothing else, it's just a good metaphor to help us move forward. And schizophrenics, for instance, are largely left brain dominated. So she's right. It's an extreme situation. But right now, I think that the extremes that we're seeing in civilization, the comparison works, and that's all it is really. It's a generalization and a comparison, and it's something to be aware of, that we need to use our whole minds and try to be balanced individuals and not go from one extreme to the other. Because that is where you can get trapped and manipulated by the powers that be into helping them with their cause, if you will. And free thinkers. In order to be free thinkers, we have to be free and use the whole brain, not just bits and pieces of it. So yes, she's right in that. It's a generalization, and it's simply a way of talking about what's going on in the world out there right now.
Wonderful, sister. Well, looks like we're blank over on Cash App, so we didn't miss anybody, and that's what's important. So let's go ahead and have you, Rachel, tell everyone where they can find your books and where they can find you, and then we will look forward to having you back here in the near future.
The books are available only at Amazon right now. I have not found anything that's comparable to that. So they're on Amazon right now, and it's just look for Rachel Summers Forgetting or one of the other book titles, because if you don't put a title in there, you end up finding a lot of X-Men books and such. So if you're searching on Amazon, do Rachel Summers Forgetting. That's a quick way to get to my author page. And as far as social media goes, I'm not on it that much, but I do have a Twitter account and Facebook still, and you can find me there just under my name. That's it. I need to get on YouTube again, but it's just not my thing. I try.
Well, we definitely encourage people to go buy your books. And as I said, you have 2 other episodes. They can be found on the afterparty.tv. And we'll have your links when this show that you're listening to right now is posted. My site is thegreatorder.com. So that is the clearinghouse, the record of all of the different things that I do. New music should be coming down the pike very soon. And please bookmark our websites, follow us on social media for continued news and information coming your way. So we hope all of you enjoy the rest of your week. We'll be talking to you soon. And Jason, I give it to you to take us out today, my friend.
Well, thank you so much, dear brother. We had some technical difficulties, folks, but we work it out. We always work it out. And we are so happy that you all were able to be here with us. And those who wrote in the live chat, thank you so much. Those who will write in the thread, thank you to you all. Those who were wallflowers, we appreciate you every bit as much as well. And a big thank you to every single person who financially gifted over the course of this tap. We deeply appreciate every single cent that is contributed. I love you all. We will be back next week with another wonderful tap episode and another wonderful guest. And we will have the great Rachel Summers back again in the near future. Thank you all for being here, and we look forward to seeing you next time.